Silent battlefields, where historic photos whisper the untold stories of war and human memory. Amidst the bustle of a United Service Organization (USO) event circa 1943, a woman in a bikini gracefully walks among the ranks of smiling and amused American servicemen. Performances and entertainment like this were organized by the USO to ease the war fatigues, bringing joy and optimism to American soldiers serving in World War II. Three young women, Janice Cooper, Marilyn Connor, and Gloria Ellickson, attracted all eyes while sunbathing at Steeplechase Park on Coney Island, New York, in the 1940s. What was special was that they wore unique swimsuits made from World War II Air Force escape maps, a meaningful gift from their pilot boyfriends. The image was both sexy, daring, and full of wartime imprints of a turbulent period. This disturbing photograph captures the moment after World War II, when a French woman had her head shaved in public as punishment for allegedly collaborating or having relations with occupying German soldiers. Her face is blank, her eyes blank with shame and hatred, while those around her look on indifferently. The images reveal a dark chapter, where honor and revenge collided with post-war rage. This haunting photograph captures the moment when German women, often called Trümmerfrauen, labored amid the rubble of World War II. They passed each brick from hand to hand, rebuilding the country from the ashes of war. There were no soldiers, no buildings, just gaunt hands and determined eyes. In the devastation, these women laid the foundations for a reborn Germany. This chilling photograph captures the moment women in a Nazi concentration camp faced death. A female prisoner calmly walked to the gallows, while the bodies of others dangled behind her. Her resigned gaze contrasted sharply with the SS officer's cold demeanor. No crying, no lamentation, just the eerie silence of evil and the ultimate human tragedy. Amidst the flames of war, this moment was like a ray of light in the darkness. The American soldier hugged his lover tightly in his arms, kissing her passionately right before going into battle. Behind him were his comrades laughing and joking, but in their eyes there was fear and separation. A kiss between life and death, between love and war, where their hearts still burned even though the world around them was collapsing. In the peaceful scene in the tent, World War II soldiers lay resting after a day of life and death. Cigarette smoke drifted up, but in their eyes was endless worry. No one knew if they would wake up in this world tomorrow. That silence was heavier than the sound of bombs and bullets. When war not only kills with guns, but with fears silently gnawing at people's souls. Amidst the sound of drills and metal collisions, these women were not only assembling planes, they were building hope for the world. When men went to war, they became silent warriors in factories. Their soft hands now held tools tightly, their steadfast eyes turned to the bomb-filled sky. War had robbed them of their youth, but it had also turned them into indomitable symbols of strength and courage. In the stuffy space of a submarine in 1942, the officer quietly looked through the periscope, his eyes tense as if piercing through the dark water. Every glance was between life and death. Just a small mistake, the whole ship could be buried under the cold ocean floor. The engine roared, his heart pounded. In that moment, he was not just a soldier, but the fragile boundary between life and destruction. In the midst of the brutal war in 1944, these nurses had just arrived in France after 3 years of traveling through England and Egypt. They smiled amid the ruins, wearing dusty uniforms that masked sleepless nights and the hundreds of lives they had lost. They held no guns, but they faced death every day, angels in a hell where kindness was the strongest weapon. On the morning of August 6, 1945, Colonel Paul W. Tibbets waved from the cockpit of the Enola Gay, but he had no idea that just a few hours later, the world would change forever. That B-29 carried the first atomic bomb in history, Little Boy. When it fell on Hiroshima, more than 140,000 lives were lost in the blink of an eye. That pre-flight smile became a symbol of humanity's first brush with hell. November 5th, 1944, near Nancy, France, Corporal Carlton Chapman, a machine gunner on an M4 tank of the 761 Mountain Battalion, stood ready amid the smoke and flames of battle. The dirt, blood, and roar of engines mingled together. He knew that a moment's hesitation could cost the lives of his comrades. His grimy face was a cold steel gaze, the gaze of a man accustomed to facing death, but never one to let it overcome him. Milan, 1945. Amid the ruins of buildings and the echoes of gunfire, Italian guerrillas rose to reclaim their freedom. Their clothes were tattered, their weapons were crude, but their eyes burned with determination. They were not trained soldiers, but workers, farmers, students, people who turned despair into strength. When the fascists fell, Milan was not only liberated, but also witnessed the moment when people conquered their own fears. Amid the dust of war in London, a female member of the Motor Transport Training Corps is bent over changing a tire at the ARP station in Lambeth. Without makeup or fear of dirt, she grips the heavy tire with a determined gaze, a symbol of the steely spirit of women in wartime. In the sirens and shadows of war, she remains steadfast, proving that strength does not belong only to men. In the midst of the fierce World War II, women in WAC uniforms stand at attention and salute the motherland. Their eyes blazing, proud and indomitable. They do not hold guns in the trenches, but are still brave warriors in the rear, keeping the heartbeat of an America burning with patriotism. In 1943, they officially became part of the United States Army, an eternal symbol of strength and silent sacrifice. When the United States entered the war, millions of men joined the fight. Women entered the war effort to fill vacant civilian and military positions that had previously been considered male-dominated. They replaced men in assembly lines, factories, and military workshops, leading to iconic figures like Rosie the Riveter, who inspired a sense of strength, patriotism, and emancipation among women. On January 27, 1945, Soviet troops entered Auschwitz and found about 7,600 Jewish prisoners left behind. Here, a doctor from the Red Army's 322nd Infantry Division is helping to lead survivors out of the camp. They stand at the entrance, where the iconic sign reads, "Arbeit macht frei," work brings freedom. Soviet troops also discovered piles of corpses and hundreds of thousands of personal belongings. Before the Allies liberated the camps, Nazi guards carried out death marches. Throughout January, more than 60,000 prisoners were forced to march about 30 miles, 48 kilometers, in a state of emaciation and weakness, leading to the deaths of many. The survivors were taken to other concentration camps in Germany. April 1945. In Wernberg, Germany was dying in flames. The soldiers of the U.S. Third Army charged into a sea of thick black smoke, amid the roar of tanks and the breath of war. Every step they took was the boundary between life and death. The town was in ruins, the sky was dark, but their eyes were still bright, determined to end the nightmare called Nazi Germany, even if it cost them their own blood. In July 1943, the ground of Kursk shook under the roar of more than 6,000 tanks and 2 million souls ready to die. The German Tigers charged like steel monsters, crushing the earth and sky in a rain of bullets. But behind the thick smoke, the Soviet Red Army rose up to counterattack fiercely. The Battle of Kursk, where steel met steel, blood mixed with earth, marked the turning point that began to collapse the fascist empire. In the middle of the battlefield of Kursk in July 1943, a German soldier sat with his head bowed in despair beside a blown-up cannon and the cold bodies of his comrades. The cannons fell silent, leaving only the wind howling across the fields, filled with the acrid smell of steel and blood. The empire he had believed in was crumbling before his eyes. In that moment, victory or defeat meant nothing, only the horror of a broken soul in a living hell. On September 2nd, 1945, on the deck of the USS Missouri, the atmosphere was suffocating as General Douglas MacArthur coldly accepted Japan's unconditional surrender. The Japanese officers bowed their heads in silence, bringing an empire that had terrorized Asia to a close. The signing of the treaty was also the moment World War II ended. An empire collapsed, millions of lives exchanged for two words: peace. On March 15, 1939, the heavy footsteps of the German army echoed through the cobblestone streets of Prague, the capital of Czechoslovakia. Long lines of soldiers in their distinctive gray uniforms and steel helmets marched in neat rows, rifles slung over their shoulders, into the city center, as the locals watched in bewilderment and helplessness. The invasion marked the end of Czechoslovak independence, as the small country was quickly swallowed up by the massive Nazi war machine. The image of the army marching into Prague became a haunting testament to Hitler's unstoppable expansion in the early years of World War II. In February 1942, in Singapore, Britain's impregnable citadel in the Far East, British, Australian, and Indian soldiers were forced to surrender to the Japanese army after days of fierce fighting. In their mud-stained uniforms, they silently bowed their heads before the enemy's guns. This event marked the most humiliating defeat in British military history, with more than 80,000 soldiers taken prisoner, and paved the way for Japan to control all of Southeast Asia at the height of World War II. In the final days of World War II, Hitler desperately relied on the fledgling youth force from the Hitler Youth, turning them into reluctant soldiers on the bloody battlefield. In the photo, he appears with a cold gaze, gently touching the face of a boy who had just been awarded a medal, as if to instill blind faith in them. These young faces, not yet 20 years old, were caught up in the vortex of propaganda, becoming human shields for a regime about to collapse. This is a tragic testament to the exploitation of youth in the frenzy of war. In the dimly lit train station, a sailor hurriedly gave his lover a passionate farewell kiss before the train rolled away. The girl stood on tiptoe, hugging him tightly through the train window, as if holding on to the last bit of warmth in the short moment. All around, silent eyes watched, filled with sympathy. The photo captured not only a farewell kiss, but also a symbol of love, sacrifice, and the pain of separation in war, where every encounter could be the last. The introduction of the American gas mask in combat. To protect troops from chemical attacks, the United States issued gas masks widely. Training ensured that soldiers could quickly put on masks when attacked. This protective device saved many lives in the mustard gas environment. Masks became an essential part of combat gear. Their use marked a new era in chemical warfare defense. Of course, the vast majority of deaths in World War II occurred on the battlefield or in concentration camps, but there were other ways to die as well. As the war began to draw to an inevitable end, and it became clear that the Allies would win, many German officials, such as Ernst Lissow, chose suicide rather than face almost certain execution by the Allies for their war crimes. With seemingly endless bombing campaigns reducing cities to rubble, those fortunate enough not to see combat live in constant fear of death. Pictured above are British schoolchildren taking part in an air raid drill. Neither the wooden desks nor the way they position their hands would offer much protection if hit by a German bomb. While most school children cowered under their desks during air raids, adults who were out during a terrorist attack often had to run to the nearest tube station to minimize their risk of death. like these Londoners during a German air raid. While the tube offered a relatively high level of protection, those who took shelter there could still be confined to their new tube homes for days, with bombs occasionally penetrating shallower parts of the station. Due to the indiscriminate and sustained nature of much of the bombing during World War II, even those who tried their best to find shelter at the beginning of a raid often failed to act quickly enough. Such was the case with the passengers on this London bus. At the Battle of Midway, Japan's dominance in the Pacific was finally called into question. From June 3rd to 7th, 1942, just 6 months after Japan devastated the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor, the United States inflicted a decisive and devastating blow on Japan in the Pacific, destroying 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, a heavy cruiser, and 248 aircraft in the process. Some 3,057 Japanese soldiers died in the campaign, compared to just 307 Americans. While many soldiers in the war sought the glory of aerial combat rather than the harsh realities of ground combat, pilots were also forced to endure countless horrors in the skies. Mechanical failures leading to engine failure were not uncommon, and those lucky enough to avoid being shot down in a skirmish were also vulnerable to mid-air collisions, as was the case with this unfortunate pilot. In this iconic photograph, British prisoner of war Horace Greasley stares down one of the Nazi Party's leading figures, Heinrich Himmler. Here, Himmler is touring one of the many active German prisoner of war camps. He was the leader of the Nazis' notorious SS and the chief overseer of the concentration camps that systematically murdered millions of people. In the Allied effort to liberate the Pacific from Japanese control, an island-hopping strategy was employed, which saw the Allies systematically gain control of several key Japanese-held islands. One of these was Okinawa. Although the Allies ultimately won, the victory was difficult, and Japan's determination to fight to the end in this conflict was one of the reasons why the atomic bomb was ultimately deemed necessary. Although World War II caused countless forms of destruction, the devastation caused by the atomic bomb, nicknamed Little Boy, dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, was the most catastrophic. United States officials debated whether to use the bomb. Ultimately, they justified its use on the grounds that it was a necessary evil, as well as the fact that if they did not drop such a devastating device, the Japanese would continue to fight to the last man, ultimately leading to more death and destruction. After the bomb was dropped, approximately 12.2 square kilometers, 4.7 square miles, of Hiroshima City were destroyed, with buildings reduced to irreparable rubble. The force of the explosion also immediately caused a series of fierce fires, quickly burning down any houses that were lucky enough to remain standing. Although World War I was technically the first major war fought in the Industrial Age, World War II brought with it a much more powerful array of weapons. These modern guns, tanks, and explosives were deafening to both the users and the recipients, and many soldiers suffered permanent hearing loss as a result. An American tank plows through the mud as the Ninth Army's attack on Germany begins. 1944. September 26, 1945. Japanese troops are surrounded by British forces in the Hong Kong shipyards. Under the command of Admiral Harcourt, a British task force recaptures the area after nearly 4 years of Japanese occupation. Around 1943, under a cloudy sky, a Royal Air Force RAF medium bomber glided silently, carrying its destructive power towards enemy territory. With its 2 powerful engines and its distinctive moss-colored camouflaged fuselage, it was both a symbol of British military technology and a testament to the dangerous missions its crew faced. The image of the lone bomber in the sky, evoked both the heroism and tragedy of the fierce war. Circa 1945, against a backdrop of ruined buildings and rubble-strewn streets, a long column of defeated German soldiers trudged along with their hands on their heads. They had become prisoners of the U.S. Ninth Army after fierce fighting. Their faces, burned by the flames, showed exhaustion, frustration, and helplessness in the face of the inevitable collapse of the Third Reich. This scene clearly depicted the end of fascist expansionism. May 1945. Members of the Danish resistance movement escort two women arrested for their relations with the Nazis during the war. Circa 1943, German soldiers evacuate a house in Kharkov, destroyed by Russian artillery fire. Nurses, air raid prevention workers, and rescue workers tend to injured hospital patients, waiting on stretchers to be taken to nearby hospitals, after an air raid by a Nazi German Vergeltungswaffe Fiesler Fi-103 V1 Doodlebug bomber that hit Lewisham Hospital on the 26th of July, 1944, in London, England. May 31st, 1945, U.S. Marines of the 1st Division wait on a hilltop south of Okinawa as they watch phosphorus shells explode over the heads of Japanese soldiers entrenched on the hill. Circa 1940. An African-American war worker in a munitions factory.